When you think of a 10-year-old child, your mind goes on a child in his or her 5th grade, in primary school, the playground, playing with other children. Parents may notice that around 10 years old, children start thinking and sounding almost grown up. Children this age are on the cusp of adolescence and have the language skills and cognitive ability to gather information and formulate well-organized opinions and thoughts. As such, many 10-year-old children can be pleasant company at dinner and at social gatherings, capable of expressing their thoughts on current events, books, music, art, and other subjects. By this age, they should understand how their behavior affects others. They also should recognize and consider other people's opinions and views and have a sense of what's right and wrong, fair or unfair. Never in your mindset will you think a 10-year-old child is on death row awaiting execution. James Arcene was born on 1862. He was the youngest child sentenced to death, who was subsequently executed for his crime, in the United States. Arcene, a Cherokee man, was hanged by the U.S. federal government, in Fort Smith, Arkansas for his role in a robbery and murder, committed 13 years earlier, when he was 10 years old. He and a Cherokee adult named William Parchmeal noticed William Feigl, a Swedish national, making a purchase in a store. They followed him when he left, heading for Fort Gibson, and caught up with him about 2 miles outside of the fort. With robbery as a motive, they shot Feigl 6 times before crushing his skull with a rock. Arcene and Parchmeal then divested Feigl's corpse of its boots and money, totaling only 25 cents. Arcene was arrested and tried for the robbery and murder of his victim, but escaped and eluded capture until he was apprehended and executed at the age of 23. He and Parchmeal were ultimately brought to justice by Deputy Marshal Andrews, after the case had lain cold for more than 10 years. Hanging Judge Isaac Parker presided over the executions, which were held at Fort Smith. It is difficult to verify James Arcene's age with complete certainty, because there are few surviving census records for Indian Territory in the 1870s and 1880s. Primary documents confirm that, after he was captured, James Arcene claimed to have been a child in 1872 when the crime was committed. He did not revise that statement when it became clear that that status would not help him in sentencing. Arcene's case is frequently brought up in discussions of the death penalty for children, and to a lesser degree in discussions of the unfair treatment Native Americans received from the United States government. On June 26, 1885, 2 Cherokee men, James Arcene and William Parchmeal, were hanged at Fort Smith, Arkansas. Moments before their deaths, both men made statements, though it is unlikely that their last words were intelligible to many witnesses at the military outpost, owing to the heavy rain and the fact that Parchmeal spoke little English. Under the eye of federal Judge Isaac Parker, the notorious hanging judge of the Old Southwest, Arcene and Parchmeal had their limbs bound and their faces covered before being launched into eternity. In February, Arcene and Parchmeal had been convicted of a murder committed 13 years previously. On November 25, 1872, someone had killed a Swedish immigrant named Henry Feigl on the road near Fort Gibson in Indian Territory. The case remained unsolved for over a decade. In 1884, 12 years after Feigl's death, A U.S. deputy marshal named Andrews arrested Arcene and Parchmeal in connection with the murder. Though documents describing the evidence used to obtain the arrest warrant are not readily available, Andrews was able to convince a judge that the trail had not gone cold after so many years. Arcene denied having knowledge of the killing, but Parchmeal made a statement through an interpreter admitting being present, but said that he was there under duress and that Arcene did the killing. After both men were convicted, Arcene made a confession stating that he had shot Feigl 6 times. Then both took rocks and mashed the man's head before dragging him off the road and robbing him of his boots and 25 cents. Judge Parker sentenced both men to hang. At first glance, there is little to distinguish this case from the 77 other executions presided over by Judge Parker during his tenure at Fort Smith. Parker had been appointed to the bench in the hope that he would make Indian Territory feel the full might of the federal government, and he did not disappoint. According to one chronicler of the Fort Smith court under Judge Parker, tried, found guilty as charged, sentenced, was the tale repeated until the mere fact of arrest meant almost certain conviction. The sentence to die on the gallows was passed upon more men here than anywhere in history. So numerous were the executions ordered and so commonplace the thunderous crash of the gallows trap that street urchins playing outside the old walls would gleefully shout, "There goes another man to hell with his boots on." But this execution was peculiar, in one significant detail. James Arcene claimed to have been only a boy, about 10 or 12 years old at the time of the murder. If true, he was one of the youngest criminals in American history to have his crime punished by a federally sanctioned execution. It is difficult to verify James Arcene's age with any degree of certainty. Census records for Indian Territory in the 1870s and 1880s are spotty at best, and few other vital records survive. It is possible that Arcene may have hoped to obtain a pardon by falsely pleading youth, but he did not revise his statement, even when it became apparent that it would do him no good. We may never know how old James Arcene really was. All we can know is that he claimed to have been a child in 1872 and that Judge Parker ignored this information and sentenced the adult who stood before him. If James Arcene was a juvenile offender, he looked very much like the other children and adolescents executed in the United States since the era of the American Revolution. Those offenders executed for crimes committed before the age of 18, have disproportionately been African American, Native American, or Hispanic teenagers who have committed crimes against white victims. This is true of the 20th century as well as the 19th. Of the 22 juvenile offenders executed for murder in the U.S. between 1976 and 2004, 77% had killed a white victim, though only 50% of homicides perpetrated by juvenile offenders involved a white victim. As of 2004, 9 of the last 10 juvenile offenders executed in Texas, the state responsible for 59% of all juvenile executions, were Black or Hispanic. In March of 2005, the Supreme Court handed down a 5-4 ruling in Roper v. Simmons, declaring that states could no longer execute criminals who had committed their crimes while under the age of 18. Thank you for watching Death Row.